Showdown at Sunset, Jacob Carson vs. the Baron, written by Reuben White. Chapter 1, Blood on the Plains. The American frontier stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of untamed wilderness and lawless chaos. It was a land where justice was scarce, and violence was as common as the dust that coated every surface. In the heart of this unforgiving landscape, Jacob Carson toiled away on his small farm, his hands calloused from years of hard work, his heart heavy with the weight of the frontier's hardships. Jacob was a simple man, content with his lot in life. He had a loving wife, Mary, and 2 young children, Tommy and Sarah. Together, they carved out a meager existence on the edge of civilization, eking out a living from the land and the sweat of their brow. But life on the frontier was never easy, and danger lurked around every corner. Outlaws roamed the plains like wolves, preying on the weak and the innocent with impunity. Jacob knew the risks, but he never imagined that they would come knocking on his door. One fateful day, as the sun dipped low on the horizon and shadows stretched across the plains, a gang of outlaws descended upon Jacob's farm like a plague of locusts. They rode in with guns blazing, their faces twisted with malice as they laid waste to everything in their path. Jacob watched in horror as his world was torn apart before his very eyes. Mary's screams echoed in his ears as she tried to shield their children from the onslaught, but there was no escape from the carnage. In the blink of an eye, Jacob's entire world was reduced to ash and rubble. Left for dead amidst the wreckage of his home, Jacob clung to life by a thread. His body was battered and broken, his spirit shattered by grief and rage. But even as he lay on the brink of death, a fire burned within him, a fire fueled by the need for vengeance. As the last embers of daylight faded into darkness, Jacob rose from the ashes like a phoenix reborn. He would not rest until those responsible for his family's murder were brought to justice. With a steely resolve, he set out into the wilderness, his heart heavy with grief and his hands stained with blood. For Jacob Carson, the journey had only just begun. And on the frontier, where the line between right and wrong was as thin as a razor's edge, there was no telling what horrors awaited him on the path to redemption. Chapter 2, The tragic event. The night was as dark as pitch, the stars obscured by thick clouds that hung low over the frontier. Jacob Carson was huddled by the dying embers of his hearth, his eyes heavy with exhaustion as he watched over his slumbering family. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, a mournful lament that seemed to echo the loneliness of the vast wilderness beyond. Suddenly, the stillness was shattered by the sound of hooves thundering across the plains. Jacob's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the unmistakable sound of riders approaching. He leaped to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that hung above the door. But it was too late. The door exploded inward with a deafening crash, splinters flying in all directions as a gang of outlaws stormed into the room. They were a sight straight from the bowels of hell, their faces masked by bandanas and their eyes gleaming with malice as they brandished their weapons. Mary screamed, clutching Tommy and Sarah to her chest as she backed away from the advancing horde. Jacob's blood ran cold as he realized the true nature of the threat they faced. These were not ordinary bandits, they were killers, driven by a lust for blood and a thirst for violence that knew no bounds. In the blink of an eye, chaos erupted. Gunshots rang out like thunder in the night, the staccato rhythm of death echoing through the small farmhouse. Jacob fought with every ounce of strength he possessed, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. He watched in horror as Mary fell, a bullet tearing through her chest as she cradled their children in her arms. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Jacob's world collapsed around him. He felt a searing pain lancing through his side, the metallic tang of blood filling his mouth as he stumbled backward. In that moment of agony and despair, something inside him snapped. With a primal roar, Jacob rose to his feet, his eyes blazing with fury as he faced down his attackers. He knew he had no chance of survival, but he would be damned if he let these monsters escape unpunished. With a speed and ferocity that belied his years, he fought like a man possessed, his fists and feet becoming weapons of vengeance. But it was not enough. In the end, he was overpowered, beaten within an inch of his life, and left for dead amidst the carnage. As he lay bleeding on the cold, hard floor, his vision swimming with pain and his ears ringing with the cries of the dying, he made a vow. He would not rest until every last one of these bastards was brought to justice. He would become a shadow, a specter of vengeance that haunted the nightmares of the guilty. He would become the shadow. And so, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jacob Carson took his first step on the path to redemption. The journey would be long and fraught with peril, but he would not falter. For he had a debt to repay, a debt written in blood and paid for with the lives of those he loved most in this world. And he would see it paid in full, or die trying. Chapter 3. Embarking on the quest for vengeance. The dawn broke over the rugged landscape of the American frontier, casting a golden hue over the desolate plains. In the heart of this untamed wilderness, Jacob Carson emerged from the ashes of his former life, a man transformed by grief and rage, his eyes burning with a steely resolve. With every fiber of his being, Jacob vowed to hunt down the outlaws responsible for the brutal slaughter of his family. The memory of their faces haunted his dreams, their laughter echoing in the dark recesses of his mind. He would not rest until he had brought them to justice, until he had avenged the blood of his loved ones with his own hands. And so, with a grim determination, Jacob set out into the wilderness, his heart heavy with the weight of his mission. He traveled alone, a lone wolf prowling the vast expanse of the frontier, his only companions the shadows that danced at the edges of his vision. But the path to vengeance was not an easy one. Jacob encountered countless obstacles along the way, from treacherous terrain to ruthless outlaws who sought to thwart his quest at every turn. Each encounter tested his resolve, pushing him to the brink of despair as he struggled to overcome the forces arrayed against him. Yet through it all, Jacob remained steadfast in his determination, guided by a moral compass that burned bright even in the darkest of times. He refused to compromise his principles, even when faced with the temptation to abandon his quest and succumb to the darkness that threatened to consume him. And though he walked a path fraught with danger and uncertainty, Jacob never lost sight of his ultimate goal. For he knew that the only way to find peace in this life was to confront the demons that haunted him, to stare into the abyss and emerge unscathed on the other side. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Jacob's quest for vengeance took him to the farthest reaches of the frontier. He traveled from town to town, from saloon to saloon, following the trail of blood and betrayal that led him ever closer to his quarry. But with each step he took, Jacob felt the weight of his burden grow heavier upon his shoulders. The lines between right and wrong blurred in the harsh light of the frontier, and he found himself grappling with doubts and fears that threatened to overwhelm him. Yet still he pressed on, driven by a fire that burned bright within his soul. For he knew that the only way to find peace in this life was to confront the shadows that dwelled within him, to banish them once and for all, and emerge from the darkness into the light of a new dawn. And so, with every heartbeat, with every breath, Jacob Carson marched ever onward, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his heart set on the path of redemption. Chapter 4. Uncovering the web of corruption. As Jacob Carson journeyed deeper into the heart of the frontier, he soon realized that the roots of evil ran far deeper than he could have ever imagined. The outlaws who had taken everything from him were but pawns in a much larger game, a game orchestrated by a shadowy figure known only as the Baron. The mere mention of the Baron sent shivers down the spines of those who dared speak his name. He was a legend, a myth whispered in hushed tones around campfires and saloon tables. But Jacob knew that behind every myth lay a kernel of truth, and he was determined to uncover the truth about the Baron's role in the corruption that plagued the frontier. His investigations led him to remote outposts and hidden hideouts, where he pieced together the fragments of a conspiracy that spanned the length and breadth of the frontier. He learned of secret alliances forged in the darkness, of backroom deals struck with blood money, of innocent lives sacrificed on the altar of greed and power. But as Jacob delved deeper into the murky waters of corruption, he found himself walking a dangerous tightrope between right and wrong. The lines between justice and vengeance blurred, and he was forced to confront the moral ambiguity of his quest. Yet still, he pressed on, driven by a burning desire to see the Baron brought to justice, no matter the cost. Along the way, Jacob formed unlikely alliances with lawmen, Native Americans, and other frontier inhabitants who shared his desire to see the Baron's reign of terror brought to an end. Together, they pooled their resources and their knowledge, piecing the puzzle of the Baron's web of corruption one thread at a time. But as they drew closer to the truth, they also drew closer to danger. The Baron's reach extended far and wide, and he would stop at nothing to protect his interests and maintain his grip on power. Jacob knew that the showdown was fast approaching, and he steeled himself for the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead. For he knew that only by confronting the darkness head-on could he hope to emerge victorious. And so, with his allies by his side and his resolve as strong as tempered steel, Jacob Carson prepared to face the Baron and his minions in a battle that would determine the fate of the frontier itself. Chapter 5. The pursuit intensifies. As Jacob Carson's quest for vengeance pressed on, the shadows of the frontier seemed to close in around him. Each step he took brought him closer to his elusive prey, but also deeper into the heart of danger. The Baron's henchmen lurked around every corner, their faces obscured by bandanas, their guns cocked and ready. They were like ghosts, slipping in and out of the shadows with deadly precision, their sole purpose to protect their master at any cost. But Jacob was undeterred. With a steely resolve, he met each confrontation head-on, his fists clenched and his eyes blazing with fury. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his blows landing like thunder as he struck down his enemies one by one. Yet with each victory came a price. The toll of Jacob's vendetta weighed heavy on his soul. A burden too heavy for any man to bear. He watched as those around him fell victim to the violence that consumed his every waking thought, their lives shattered by the same darkness that haunted his own. Mary's face haunted his dreams, her voice a distant echo in the empty corridors of his mind. Tommy and Sarah's laughter was a cruel reminder of all that he had lost, a wound that refused to heal no matter how hard he tried to ignore it. And still, the Baron remained one step ahead, his influence spreading like cancer across the frontier. He pulled the strings from the shadows, manipulating events to suit his twisted desires, his iron grip tightening with each passing day. But Jacob refused to be cowed. With every ounce of strength he possessed, he pushed forward, driven by a need for justice that burned hotter than the sun overhead. He knew that the showdown was fast approaching, and he would not rest until the Baron lay broken at his feet. For he had seen the depths of depravity that lurked within the heart of the frontier, and he knew that only by confronting the darkness head-on could he hope to emerge victorious. And so, with his resolve as unyielding as the mountains that loomed on the horizon, Jacob Carson prepared to face his greatest challenge yet. Chapter 6. Inner Struggle and Redemption. As Jacob Carson delved deeper into the heart of darkness that gripped the frontier, he found himself facing an enemy far more insidious than any outlaw or henchman of the Baron, the darkness within himself. With each passing day, Jacob's soul grew heavier with the weight of his vendetta. The line between right and wrong blurred, and he found himself questioning the righteousness of his quest. Was he truly seeking justice, or had he become nothing more than a vengeful ghost, driven by rage and despair? The doubts gnawed at him like a pack of hungry wolves, tearing away at his resolve until there was nothing left but an empty shell. He questioned his motives, his actions, his very existence. Was he worthy of redemption, or was he doomed to walk the path of darkness forever? Yet amidst the chaos and the turmoil, there were moments of clarity, of introspection, and self-discovery. Jacob found solace in the quiet moments of reflection, in the beauty of the untamed wilderness that surrounded him. He rediscovered the simple joys of life, the warmth of the sun on his face, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the gentle touch of a loved one's hand. And in those moments, he began to see a glimmer of hope, a flicker of light amidst the darkness. He realized that redemption was not something that could be given or taken away, but something that had to be earned, day by day, moment by moment. With each act of kindness, each small gesture of compassion, Jacob began to chip away at the walls that surrounded his heart. He reached out to those in need, offering aid and comfort where he could. He forged bonds of friendship and camaraderie with his fellow travelers, finding strength in their shared struggle against the forces of evil. And slowly but surely, Jacob felt the darkness begin to recede, replaced by a sense of peace and inner calm. He knew that the journey was far from over, that there were still trials and tribulations ahead. But he also knew that as long as he held on to hope, as long as he stayed true to his moral compass, he would never truly be lost to the shadows. For redemption was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new chapter in Jacob Carson's life. And as he stood on the precipice of that new dawn, he knew that whatever lay ahead, he would face it with courage, with determination, and with a heart full of hope. Chapter 7, The Final Showdown. The tension in the air was palpable as Jacob Carson rode into town, his six-shooter strapped to his hip and his heart heavy with anticipation. He knew that the time had come for the final showdown, the ultimate confrontation with the Baron that would determine the fate of the frontier. The streets were deserted as Jacob made his way to the abandoned saloon where the Baron was rumored to be holed up. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the creaking of the swinging doors as Jacob pushed them open and stepped inside. The saloon was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with the stench of whiskey and stale smoke. Jacob's senses were on high alert as he moved cautiously through the shadows, his hand hovering over the grip of his gun. And then he saw him, the Baron, sitting at a table in the far corner of the room, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. Jacob's heart skipped a beat as he locked eyes with his nemesis, the intensity of their gaze sparking like flint against steel. Without a word, Jacob raised his gun, his finger tightening on the trigger as he prepared to unleash the full force of his wrath upon the Baron. But before he could fire, the Baron spoke, his voice like ice in the darkness. "You may have come seeking vengeance, Carson," he said, his words dripping with malice, "but you will find only death." And with that, the room erupted into chaos. Gunshots rang out like thunder as Jacob and the Baron exchanged fire, the bullets tearing through the air with deadly precision. Tables were overturned, bottles shattered, and the very walls seemed to tremble with the force of their fury. It was a battle of wills, a clash of titans locked in mortal combat. Each shot fired was a testament to the hatred that burned within their souls, a testament to the blood that had been spilled and the lives that had been lost. But in the end, there could only be one victor. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Jacob Carson unleashed a barrage of bullets that found their mark, tearing through the Baron's defenses and striking him down where he stood. As the smoke cleared and the echoes of gunfire faded into silence, Jacob Carson stood alone in the ruins of the saloon, his chest heaving with exhaustion and his hands stained with blood. The battle was over, the conflict resolved, but the scars would remain forever. And yet, amidst the carnage and the chaos, there was a sense of peace. For Jacob had faced his demons head-on and emerged victorious. He had found redemption amid darkness, and in doing so, had reclaimed his soul from the shadows. As he stepped out into the fading light of the setting sun, Jacob Carson knew that the frontier would never be the same again. But he also knew that he had played his part in shaping its destiny and that wherever the road ahead might lead, he would face it with courage, with determination, and with a heart full of hope. Epilogue. Riding into the sunset, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the vast expanse of the American frontier as Jacob Carson stood at the edge of town, his gaze fixed on the fading light. The echoes of gunfire still rang in his ears, a constant reminder of the battles that had been fought and the lives that had been lost. As he looked back on his journey, Jacob felt a pang of sadness mingled with a sense of pride. He had faced his demons head-on, confronted the darkness that lurked within his soul, and emerged stronger for it. But the price of justice had been high, too high, and Jacob knew that he could never truly leave the past behind. With a heavy heart, Jacob turned away from the setting sun and walked towards his horse, his faithful companion through it all. He knew that it was time to leave the frontier behind, to seek a new beginning far from the shadows that had haunted him for so long. And so, with a final glance over his shoulder, Jacob mounted his horse and rode off into the fading light, leaving the town and its memories behind him. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Jacob faced it with a sense of determination and hope, knowing that redemption awaited him somewhere on the horizon. For even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of light, a beacon of hope that shone through the shadows. And as Jacob rode into the sunset, he carried that light within him, a reminder that no matter how far he traveled or how hard the journey, there was always the possibility of redemption, always the chance to find peace amid chaos. And so, with the wind at his back and the open road stretching out before him, Jacob Carson rode into the sunset, his heart full of hope and his spirit renewed. For in the end, he knew that no matter what trials and tribulations lay ahead, he would face them with courage, determination, and with a heart full of hope. If you are enjoying the Mystery Within channel, Hit the subscribe, follow, or like buttons for future updates.